Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. It is Tuesday, January 13th, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with political correspondent Ariela Karmel and tech editor Sharon Wrobel. Hi, good morning to you both on this extremely rainy day.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. It is day 830 of the war. The IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, says that it is on alert for surprise scenarios as U.S. mulls military strikes in Iran. Israel is said to believe that U.S. President Donald Trump will make good on his threat to attack Iran in support of the anti-regime protesters. This is amid reports of at least possibly 12,000 dead in Iran and the possibility that the regime is in its final days. We are going to look at some other topics in today's headlines, including a government coalition bill to cancel the Prime Minister's criminal charges, the latest financial saga regarding the Haredi school system. We'll also talk about the central bank's surprise interest rate cut and protests against a dairy reform. Stay with us.
3 million Israelis are dealing with trauma since October 7th. To help Israelis heal, Hadassah is there, with the largest rehabilitation center in Jerusalem, world-renowned medical centers, and youth villages. It's said, saving a life saves the world. Imagine helping millions. This is Hadassah, a life-changing force in Israel and the world.
Ariela, let's dive into this bill that is being advanced by coalition lawmakers. This was announced yesterday. The bill would repeal the crime of fraud and breach of trust. That is one of the charges that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing in all three of his ongoing corruption cases. So it's one of many attempts that have been made. I can just think of previous podcasts, many articles. The Prime Minister's long-running trial, in which he denies all wrongdoing. But take us through this a little bit. This bill that is being advanced, how likely is it to pass? And what's some of the commentary behind it?
So the bill is in a very preliminary stage right now. All that's been announced is that several coalition lawmakers are planning to bring it forward to the Ministerial Committee on Legislation next week, which isn't a Knesset committee. This is prior to any kind of Knesset processes or votes. It's a committee made up purely of ministers within the government. And it will be on the agenda next week. And should it be approved, then it will be brought forward to the Knesset to begin that process, to vote on, and then be sent to committee for preparation for subsequent votes. I think there is a likelihood that it will be promoted through the Knesset. At the same time, I don't know how likely it is that it will ever actually see it enacted, because it's likely that the High Court would just shut it down. There have been several attempts, as you've said previously, by the coalition to delay or freeze the trial proceedings. And even if the legislation has advanced within the Knesset, the courts have always struck it down previously. I think what is interesting about this, and this is kind of typical of a lot of the arguments that the coalition uses whenever it's trying to advance anything related to legislation or to the judiciary, is that the argument about this particular charge, fraud and breach of trust, is something that has been discussed by legal scholars for years, well before Netanyahu's trial. So there is legitimacy to the discussion that's existed regarding reforming or amending this law to make it more specific and clearer, because they essentially are arguing that not only are there laws on the books that render this particular charge redundant, but that it's not clear enough. But it's not really a good faith argument. So, however, this isn't really a good faith argument, and that's what opposition lawmakers are saying right now, because the argument behind the proposed bill and what coalition lawmakers are saying is that because the current offense in the legal text isn't clear enough, The individual who is charged with such an offense, in this case the Prime Minister, of course, they don't specifically refer to the Prime Minister, but that's who we all know that it's about. The individual who's charged with this offense couldn't have known that they were committing a criminal offense at the time because the wording is vague and unclear. And it's not a good faith argument because it's, let's say, implicit, it's understood that if you are a public official, if you're an elected official, and you are accepting bribes, as the Prime Minister is alleged to have accepted, or putting pressure on media organizations, as he's alleged to have done, that you don't need to know the exact wording of a legal text to know that you're violating the law. And so opposition lawmakers are pretty unanimous in their criticism right now that this is very clearly not a good faith attempt to adapt or amend a law that many legal scholars have admitted needs amending, but that it's clearly the latest in a series of attempts by the coalition to, while the Prime Minister is in the middle of an ongoing criminal trial and in the middle of an election year, simply erase the law that he is being accused of breaching because they haven't succeeded in evading justice otherwise.
This is the latest attempt, essentially. That's what it certainly appears to be. Okay. Sticking with the ongoing, I'm thinking of the Hebrew word sichsuch, the collision course between the High Court and the coalition government. One of the latest in that ongoing conflict is the Supreme Court on Friday. You wrote this up, ordered the state to provide information on core curriculum studies in the ultra-Orthodox school system. This is about petitions that Sam spoke about last week that are challenging the transfer of funds to religious schools by the finance ministry without going through the due process that's required in the Knesset Finance Committee. Where does this really take us in this ongoing conflict about funding to the ultra-Orthodox school system? That's really what it comes down to.
Well, what's going on right now, I think, is interesting because it's kind of a nexus point of several different conflicts between the courts and the coalition and within the coalition that have been going on for a long time. It's important to note that there are a couple of different issues. We're talking about them as if they're one because they're going on simultaneously, but there are several different petitions. One of them is led by an equality group called Chidush, which was a petition that they submitted earlier in the year, almost a year ago now, I think in March. And that was specifically about the supervision and oversight of the ultra-Orthodox education system, which is an entirely separate education system from the state school system and others. Israel's education system is very separate. And it was specifically about oversight and the adherence to core curriculum, which they're supposed to do in order to receive a certain amount of state funding. In practice, most of these schools do not. So that petition was submitted almost a year ago. Subsequently, Yesh Atid, the opposition party, submitted a petition over the transfer of funds to these schools without approval or prior to approval by the Knesset Finance Committee. And this has opened up an investigation and a demand from the courts and from the Knesset Legal Council into both oversight and curriculum data from these schools, as well as data from the finance ministry over how many times it's occurred in the last 5 years that transfers to various elements of the government, to the education ministry and elsewhere, have been done without approval. So they're two separate issues, but they've all kind of intersected in the middle of this much larger campaign and conflict that we've been discussing, I think, for weeks, if not months, between the government and the courts. And this is all happening also as the government is trying to pass its budget for the coming year, which they're not able to at the moment. And one of the reasons they're not able to is because the Haredi parties are boycotting the budget until a draft bill for yeshiva students is passed. And one of the ways that the coalition was hoping to appease ultra-Orthodox parties and convince them to support the budget and support perhaps a draft regulation law that they were not happy with was by making these fund transfers to the ultra-Orthodox schools and yeshivot that they had so desperately wanted, but took place, it seems, in violation of Knesset procedure and also in violation of the law, which stipulates that these schools need to be abiding by the curriculum, etc. So it's all very intersected and complex, all of these different issues. And in terms of where it's going, I don't see the High Court obviously isn't going to back down from
Fold.
this.
Mm-hmm.
Neither will the government. But I think it'll be interesting to see, because it seems like this is the first time, at least in the last several years, that the courts are and the Knesset legal advisor as well is reviewing this issue, not just pertaining to the processes and the conduct of the education ministry in terms of supervising this the ultra-Orthodox school system, but also how the finance ministry is transferring funds. And that's, I think, even more important.
Right, in the bottom line of all of this. Okay, that was very helpful, reminding us of sort of all the various sides of this issue. Okay, we're going to take a break. When we're back, Sharon is going to take us through the latest on interest rates from the central bank, so stay with us.
What if prayer doesn't work? This question strikes us as a distinctly modern one, an outgrowth of the slow disenchantment of the world. But in truth, the question is an old one, and one given space to breathe here.
Welcome to Thoughts and Prayers. I'm your host, Jessica Fisher. Join me on a deep exploration of the relationship between religion and modernity through personal stories, classical texts, and conversations with leading rabbis, scholars, and educators.
You're almost not supposed to be doing this interview.
Our prayers accumulate on God's doorstep, piled outside like an unimaginably tall stack of letters. We cannot give up on the relationship because God doesn't come to the door as quickly as we may like. So let's keep knocking. Perhaps the gates of compassion will be opened.
Join us every week on Thoughts and Prayers, wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, Sharon, so the Bank of Israel, as you wrote, bucked expectations, lowered interest rates for a second time following the ceasefire, the October ceasefire. Why?
Right. So I think we've seen, why was it surprising? Maybe let's start with that. We've seen the Bank of Israel being very cautious, and some would even criticize, and have come under scrutiny, that they haven't lowered interest rates for more than 2 years during the war, when people were really struggling with their sort of expenses, with their mortgages, while being many of them on reserve duty. There was a lot of hardship. Well, we didn't see the Bank of Israel cutting interest rates, or they just cut it once. It seems that this time, really, what moved the Bank of Israel to cut interest rates again are not really the geopolitical reasons. They're much more the economic data reasons, which is interesting in itself, because it appears, as we know, we have a ceasefire, but we're still not sure, how fully it will be implemented. There's still a lot of fragility around having a full ceasefire. But for now, it seems that the Bank of Israel is less worried about geopolitics. It was much more worried about defense spending before, about public spending. And now we're seeing that inflation. So the Bank of Israel is mainly concerned about high inflation. So this, now I'm coming to the indicators, really, that the Bank of Israel governor said these are the three indicators that moved him, or the committee on the interest rate decision to lower interest rates again, is that we're seeing inflation that has come down from its sort of upper limit, which is 3%, to like around 2.4%. So this is one reason the Bank of Israel feels comfortable to lower interest rates again. And then we're also seeing that the shekel has been extremely strong. It's like at a 4-year high against the dollar. Now, why is that important? Because the shekel, a strong shekel, which again is also a sign of it does a sign of a support of the economy. But it also means that what we import um, becomes less expensive. Okay, so our currency can buy more, meaning that products should be coming slightly cheaper, which again goes back to inflation, right? That should also help to keep that inflation within that 3% that the Bank of Israel wants it to be there. I mean, the Bank of Israel looks ahead of time, obviously, what influences inflation, and the currency is one big factor. And then also they said, okay, let's look at employment, and also they're seeing strong employment, and also there's also less of a shortage that we saw a bit during the war because a lot of people, again, were on reserve duty. And so we saw the participation in the employment market being disrupted. And that also affects the economy, also affects inflation. And so all these three factors together convinced the Bank of Israel that the economic indicators are there to say, okay, we can cut interest rates again.
Sharon, going back to your comment about the strong shekel, which makes imports cheaper in theory, the other headline I wanted to talk to you about was the finance ministry led by Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich planning to scrap the long regulated quota system in the dairy market, opening it to competition, importing milk, which really has never happened in Israel's history. We had hundreds of farmers protesting across the country. And sort of two questions, really. Is this something that seems quite likely would actually happen? What's the likelihood of this happening, of the dairy market truly being open to competition?
As we reported last week, the dairy farmers are very, very concerned. They're actually waging like a nationwide protest, which started last week. I mean, there's a lot at stake for them, specifically the smaller dairy farmers. They've already been they've been struggling during the war because a lot of them are, just for our readers, a lot of them are located near the Gaza border communities or within them. So they really feel that they've stepped up during this time, and they've continued to produce, continued to try and produce as much milk as possible. Now we have seen shortages, and this is why we're seeing now the Treasury. Or more led by the finance minister to actually scrap these quotas. So this is a very protective system that now is going to apparently be open, meaning that the smaller farmers will make it harder for them to actually sell their milk, and they expect they're warning that 400 dairy farms are under threat. And also what they're arguing is that they feel that there's some sort of issue of fairness here. They're saying the Treasury is actually only looking at the dairy farmers, but within the dairy market, there are more parts of this market, which are the dairies and the actual suppliers. So it's not just the producers of the milk, but it's actually how the milk gets for us into the supermarket. And there we have a very concentrated market. As we know, there are very, very few suppliers and very, very few manufacturers of the cheap milk, which is the price controlled milk that's actually getting into the supermarket shelves. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is our imports. The Treasury wants to remove all these obstacles, tariffs, and so on. They have already even done that during certain periods of time when there's high demand for dairy products. But we haven't really seen imports getting into the supermarkets of milk. There's a lot of data or research missing, at least for me, to say, okay, is this worthwhile doing? Will this really help? We haven't seen anything that shows that yet. And also the importers are here. Also, there are only in Israel the two main importing companies. So again, it's very concentrated. We don't know if they will trickle, the cheaper imports to the consumers. That's one question. And what you also asked is, where are we going to import that milk? It's not so easy. There are a lot of logistical problems, whether it's the kashrut question, but there's also logistical issues of bringing, milk to Israel. It's not it's very I mean, it's pretty complicated. It's a complicated product. It can't be brought from far away. Previously, there were attempts to bring it from Turkey or from Poland. And as we suggested, we're not sure that people in Israel will feel that comfortable to buy milk from Turkey or Poland, and whether that even is an option at the moment. Let's not forget that Israel is an island. We're not, it's very hard for Israel to be dependent on other countries to get sort of basic goods. So I think, summing it up, I believe that, there is a question of that to there's a question of what the government is doing to actually bring competitors and new players into a market that is very concentrated, where only very few companies control the market. There needs to be some sort of homework to be done first within the country to actually promote players to come in and say it's worthwhile.
To buy our milk.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Makes sense. Okay, we'll keep on following that story for sure, because this is not a fully vegan country quite yet. So milk is still a very popular product on those supermarket shelves. Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Ariela, for highlighting for us what you've been working on and taking us through all the complexities. It's been good to have you on the Daily Briefing.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jessica.
And thanks to you for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Stay tuned for tomorrow's installment. This episode is produced by the Podwaves. As always, feel free to recommend us to other listeners and rate us wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, take care. Be well, everyone.